Hi, this is Debbie from CorpU, and I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, Using Learning Analytics to Improve Outcomes, with our featured panelists from J&J and Merck. Before we get started, a few housekeeping items. All attendees have entered in listen-only mode. Should you have any issues during the webinar, please type into the question box and I will assist you. Today's event will be recorded and shared at the end of the webinar. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Carl from CorpU to get us started. Carl?
Thank you so much, Debbie. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this installment of CorpU's Smarter Growth webinar series. We are thrilled and honored you chose to spend some time with us this morning, along with our esteemed panelists who are with us today as well. Our topic today is a great one, and it's drawn a large number of attendees who I'm looking forward to hearing from throughout the call. And the topic at hand, as Debbie mentioned, is using learning analytics to improve outcomes. My name is Carl Rhodes, and I'm the Chief Operating Officer of CorpU. I'm also a lifelong student and fan of using analytics to solve different human capital problems, so I'm especially looking forward to today's topic. Today, I am joined by two gentlemen who have graciously agreed to join us today and share their own expertise and experience. First, Doug Shapinski joins from Merck, where he has more than 30 years of experience in multiple roles in manufacturing and sales and HR, and his present focus is enhancing leadership capabilities through interventions in learning and development. So Doug, thank you so much for joining from New Jersey.
My pleasure to be here. Thanks, Carl.
And I'm also joined by Alfredo Perez, who joins us from J&J. Alfredo also has a wealth of experience in a variety of areas, not only in HR, but strategy, sales, and sales engagement. As you'll hear shortly, his present focus includes some really interesting work on aligning groups of employees within J&J around sort of a new or different way to work called the J&J operating system. So Alfredo, thanks to you as well, joining us from Philadelphia.
Sure, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Oh, our pleasure. So let's get started. Before diving in, just a quick agenda. So I will briefly set the stage and just quickly introduce who CorpU is and what we're here to discuss. We will then turn to Doug to tell us about some work he's doing in L&D at Merck that leverages analytics in some really interesting novel ways, I think. In turn, we'll then go to Alfredo to share his perspectives from J&J, and having seen both sets of material, I think it'll be a great discussion. Throughout today's session, I would really encourage you to liberally leverage our question box feature. So you should see it in the platform itself. Ask questions throughout. I will be keeping a log of all the questions, and we will do our best to get all your questions to the panelists and discuss as many as we can. So not only are we looking forward to having a discussion with our panelists, we're very much looking forward to having a discussion with you. So please jump in early and often. And we will also be using a polling feature to tap into the wisdom of the crowd as well. So looking forward to your participation, and thanks so much in advance. As Debbie mentioned, if you have any technical issues at all, you can use that same question box, and we will do our best to assist you. So please don't be shy if you're having any technical issues as well. Let me spend just 1 minute on who CorpU is, as I know we have many folks on the line who may not be very familiar with us. At root, CorpU is a company that's based on a really simple idea. We start with great ideas. Sometimes they are taken from academia, as illustrated in this slide, but sometimes they're taken from the companies that we work with themselves, like J&J and Merck. But we always start with an important idea. It could be a new direction that the company wants to go in. It could be a new way that the company wants its leaders to lead their colleagues. But we always start with a core idea that we are attempting to engage people around. We then get groups of leaders within companies to engage in dialogue on that, around those ideas with each other on a platform. And we do that really for two reasons. One, it vastly increases the chances that those individuals learn that idea and start to internalize it. But it also provides a very rich data stream that enables folks like Doug and Alfredo and their colleagues to see inside, if you will, the hearts and minds of those employees a bit, to learn things like, do they understand it? Do they believe in it? And will they do something about it? And then finally, we always endeavor to connect those learning analytics to business outcomes. So did my learning intervention produce a outcome in my learning population? And did that outcome in my learning population make the business better? And at root, that's what CorpU does. I say CorpU, but this is very much a shared journey and a mission. I think about what we're trying to do here is making fundamental strides toward making the learning function fundamentally more effective, particularly in the areas of leadership and change. But all that innovation and invention is only done in partnership with folks like Doug and Alfredo and our many other clients. So thanks to them as well for making this journey possible. With a brief introduction to us behind us, let me tee up what we are here to discuss today. I feel like we in this conversation are going for some big challenges that I know a lot of our clients have, and I imagine many of you have on the phone. So we're going for some big questions here. How can we measure the work and its impact? How do we know that what we are doing as human capital or learning leaders is having the impact that we seek? How can we use data to measure and improve learning outcomes themselves? So for whatever we're doing in learning and development function, how can we use learning or data and analytics to fundamentally know whether we're achieving the outcomes that the learning intervention has? Number three is the one that I think is perhaps looking forward to the frontier, which is how can we use that data from learning interventions to understand and improve the people in our organizations and the company writ large? So if we know how people are learning, if we know how people are thinking in the learning programs that we run, how can we use that information to better understand our employees, our companies, and make both more successful over time? And the last question that I think underlies a lot of our topics today are really the question around what's next. As a function, I'm looking forward to hearing Doug and Alfredo's perspective, as well as everyone on the phone. But every year we make strides, but also every year we see more things that we could achieve in the future. So we hope to have a robust conversation about where the field of learning is going, particularly in the leadership development space, but also where learning analytics as a sub-profession are going as well. So it should be a great conversation. So with that, let me turn it over to Doug from Merck, who will be sharing some interesting work that he has been doing. So Doug, let me hand it over to you.
Thank you, Carl. And if you want to go ahead and put up that next slide. The only reason I show you this is, first of all, is to assure you I'm not as scary as that photo might suggest. And second, the 30 years of experience at Merck, about 20 of that has been maybe or so in the leadership development space. And it's interesting because of all of the areas of leadership development and the learning and development function, the one that I still feel like a novice in is this area of evaluation. I really struggle to get my hands around it, and I often wonder why that is. And I've kind of come to the conclusion that it's an inability for people like me and people who are very educated and skilled in the evaluation process to have a common language and to communicate in a way that we're meeting on common ground. And so what I've found is if I'm willing to learn something around the quantitative and the technical aspects of evaluation, and I can convince my evaluation teams to maybe meet me at my level as well, we tend to have really good conversations. And so what I'm going to share with you are maybe some lessons around keeping evaluation in a way that's not so complicated, but focuses on the application of what information you gather. So next slide would be a very simple example of what Carla and I have been referring to as this virtuous evaluation cycle. This should not seem in any way new or complicated. The idea of identifying before we do anything around learning solutions, of course, we say, what are we trying to, what's the business need? If there's not a business need that can be clearly articulated, maybe move on to something else. Develop that solution. Let's collect and analyze what results we get and figure out how they're impacting things, and then modify the learning solution to ensure we're getting at those business needs. I find we're really good as a community we're pretty good at that top one of identifying needs. We're great at developing learning solutions and pretty good at collecting the results. We don't always follow through and figure out what the impacts were and then modify those learning solutions. So some thoughts around that. So let me start by walking you through the next slide will give you an example of something that CorpU and Merck have been working on for about the last 3 years or so. We were charged with creating some kind of a curriculum that helped Merck employees have a better understanding of and ability to operationalize our company strategy. And you can see this here. This is nothing that's proprietary in any way. It's available on our website, but basically it's around invent, execute, and adapt. So how do we reinforce, how do we first explain and then reinforce and then drive application around those 3 areas? And so working with my CorpU colleagues, the next slide will show you just one aspect of that curriculum design, and you can see some of the sprints that we developed, and we made those tailored to some degree. We used a lot of the CorpU content because it was, quite frankly, really good content and really hit the mark. But then we did do some tailoring of it to make it specific to Merck individuals. So that's, okay, what's the business need, the Merck strategy? What's the learning solution? Good, here it is. Next slide will then show you how are we going to evaluate the impact? And I would suggest here that one of the things I've learned, great to gather quantitative data, but the 2 other aspects that I've gotten a lot more appreciation for are to review that qualitative feedback and to make sure you take the time necessary to interpret the data that you get. It is data. What you have given to you as a result of evaluation strategy is data. How do you interpret it to turn it into information that you can actually make actionable with the organization and with your learning solution? So the next slide is just an example of the type of quantitative data that you can gather. This is, of course, a CorpU slide using CorpU instruments. I had to have my good friend Janine Barron speak very slowly and explain this to me. And after a little bit of time and getting comfortable with it, it has been very valuable in terms of over the last 3 years, we have made a lot of modifications to our curriculum, and it's gained us a lot of insight into some of the dynamics and the culture at Merck, and how we can potentially use learning solutions to have a positive impact on those areas. So my point is not to go into detail on this, but to give an example of the types of quantitative feedback that we've been getting. The next slide shows you some of the qualitative in the most obvious form is participant quotes. And as I shared with Carl, this really puts the flesh on the bones of when you're hearing people respond with an NPS score or a rating of 5 out of 6 or whatever it is. Let's get beneath the surface of that and find out where they think things are valuable. What does that exactly mean? And where they have challenges with the content, what does that mean? And you can see here some of the bolded comments. What we learned from this is that there are, and this is not surprising, there are a lot of cultural, behavioral, and leadership issues related to some of the challenges that we have, where it says here, innovative efforts of my department under the drive and invention. I'm not seeing it happening. Under cultural barriers, there are hardliners in our organization that think they have lost if they concede. And under the emphasized meaning at work, there's a lot of struggle at times to keep the sense of purpose and engagement levels. These are things that as leadership development professionals, we need to look through these and say, we need to be big kids and say some of these things we cannot address, or certainly not primarily through a learning solution, but there are others that we can. So let's look at these comments and take some guidance and some direction on how we're going to progress in terms of what we prioritize. So that's what I found to be a real value in this qualitative evaluation. So the next slide then says, okay, now that I'm doing these evaluations, in general, we need to ruthlessly prioritize. So in that first step of the whole leadership or learning and development cycle, what impacts are you looking to achieve? It's just like, it's no different than personal development. When they tell us, you're personally developing yourself, you can't pick 10 areas. You've got to pick a couple, maybe 3, and focus on that. Otherwise, you're going to overwhelm yourself. I would suggest that that exact same advice needs to be followed by us as L&D professionals when we determine what organizational impacts we want to go after. Pick the 2 or 3 that we want to focus on, not suggesting that others aren't important, but right now, what are the 2 or 3 priorities? And then prioritize the instruments that we use. In the evaluation world, there are dozens, if not hundreds, of evaluation instruments. Pick a few that are going to really get at those priorities that you've selected. And same thing now when you decide, okay, we're going to modify. We're not going to revamp the entire program. CorpU has been an outstanding partner. In every year, we make a few modifications to what we offer. And here, after 3 years, I think we've come to a whole different place. The next slide then talks about data analysis. And here's where we get those data points, whether they are quantitative or qualitative, and recognize that look for both the insights that we're going to gain on our learning solutions. And by the way, I think they're the easiest. I think they're the most obvious because we are L&D professionals. We understand our programs and our resources and our solutions. And so when we get feedback on those things, it's easier for us to interpret what that means and how to take action. The tougher one is to say, what are those data points telling us about our organization? And probably just as significantly, who needs to know that? So I would suggest a big thing that I've learned is at the beginning of developing a learning solution, who are the people in your organization that are going to have the most skin in the game in terms of the impacts? Because you can gain their feedback, but at the same time, you can provide feedback to them based on these evaluation processes that you're engaging in, that you can go back and say to those leaders, hey, this is what we're learning about the organization. Just thought you might want to know, and do that in a way that's organized for that individual or that group, and that's actionable for them. So those are my, these have been pretty high level by design, and they've also been fairly simple and straightforward, because I think that's where we need to start when it comes to evaluation. Instead of wading in immediately to all of the diagnostics and the science and the technology, let's start with the big picture. What are we here for? And then work toward using those processes to gain those insights. Carl?
Very interesting, Doug. Let me take you to a couple slides that are also, I think, getting some interest amongst our audience, if I could. So this one, where you were talking about the evaluation cycle, and you feel that the function, maybe Merck or maybe all the learning function as a whole, are better at certain things more than others. The question is really that they agree that we're pretty good at identifying business needs, we're pretty good at developing learning solutions, and we're starting to get pretty good at results. Their question is, why are we not so good at determining impact and then modifying the learning solution based on that impact? Why do you feel like we're better at certain circles in this cycle than others?
So as far as determining impact, I think that's fairly straightforward. This is my experience and my opinion, and I fully appreciate that. I think one of the reasons we're not so good at determining impact, and it's not that we're not so good, it's that we don't do it. It's because it takes a lot of time. In some cases, it can take a lot of money. And in some cases, I know I have not been asked to demonstrate the impacts of a learning solution. So, we're human beings. We have lots of stuff to do. We have lots of assignments and priorities that have been given to us. To then say, well, nobody's really asking for us to demonstrate impact, so maybe we'll just bypass that and go on to the creation of the next learning solution. I think we need to change that perception. I think it gains credibility for us as individuals and for us as a function. Even if we're not asked for the impact, to look for opportunities to say, here's what this is what has been achieved. This is the impacts that have occurred, and not take for lack of a better term, kind of take the easy route on that. Be more disciplined.
Yep. Alfredo, what's your perspective? What's your perspective on that? Do you feel like that Doug's experience about what gets more attention or less attention within Merck is consistent with J&J, or do you have a different experience?
No, it is the same. One of the things that's pretty interesting is we are getting to that point where we're being asked to measure the impact in value, and many times it's about dollars, right? And that's very difficult. If you're in sales, that's easy. You just take a look at the sales trends and things like that. But I do think that, look, the impact is a lot more challenging because it's about the behaviors that are changing. The reality is training provides people knowledge and insights on what those behaviors should be. But the reality is they need to be coached. So I always say, and I don't know if this is appropriate, but I always say, what we do in learning and development, we don't implant chips in people's heads. We give them the information, the knowledge, and the opportunity to change and make those changes. But if it's not being pulled through from their direct managers and those behaviors are observed, then the impact is not going to be what it should. Now, some of the things we're doing is, depending on the initiatives, we use the 360s, 3 months or 6 months after for really critical initiatives to see if those behaviors are changing. But that's a really tough one because that's not just training. That's really a holistic approach, and a lot of partners need to be involved. And I think that's where we have some challenges.
Great. We're getting people are joining the conversation, and I'll bring them virtually into the room. So Jill comments, I think we fall short at our organization because there's perceived value in offering more learning and less emphasis on offering few learning solutions very well. We've not found the balance. That seems similar, Doug, to what you were saying. If you're not getting a lot of pressure on an impact, well, just go on to the next one, as opposed to really sticking with the program year in and year out, perhaps.
Yeah, I think this is a demonic partnership between the rest of the organization and L&D that results in Jill's comment, which I would completely agree with. And when I say that, we need to the organization needs to get comfortable with, we don't need to have a brand new or specifically tailored solution to every individual need that's out there. It's okay if we reuse some things, and it's not flashy and new. So that part of the equation needs to be more in line with being comfortable with something that's 80-85% specific to what they need. And then on the L&D side, again, I can only speak for my organization, but you get rewarded as an L&D professional not for leveraging existing content for additional application. You get recognized and rewarded for creating something new. And as long as we have that paradigm in place, I think that's going to be the natural tendency of L&D professionals.
I think that is ringing true with a number of the comments coming in. A question that we got from Ali for you, Doug. Are you tracking any other KPIs that determine business impacts, such as engagement, mobility, retention, performance, et cetera?
We are. Depending on the program, for example, our key talent programs, we're very attuned to things like promotions and retention and expanded responsibility. We do have an engagement survey that we run every other year, and we have many of our higher level initiatives around coaching and feedback are tied to that engagement process. Absolutely. The challenge with any of those is to ferret out what impact that L&D has actually had, because there are a lot of, I mean, everybody knows this, there are a lot of factors and dynamics that impact and affect how engaged your employee population is. One of those would be things like coaching and feedback. So how do you ferret out what you're doing and how that's actually impacting that broader metric that you're talking about?
Yep. And by the way, several people are saying they're going to steal your phrase "demonic partnership." Let's go. This might be a good time.
Please leave my name out of it.
Yeah, that's right. No, non-attribution, please. This might be a great time to go to a poll that we have teed up for the audience. So Debbie, if you could pull that up for me, that would be great. And everyone, please participate in the poll. It's as easy as it looks. Which statement do you agree with most? We want to use analytics to make our learning interventions more effective, prove value of our learning interventions to stakeholders, or drive business outcomes, BU performance, employee retention, et cetera. So we'll give folks a quick minute to vote. Hopefully this will go more smoothly than Florida. And it looks like we're almost there. Great. So can we, Debbie, can we see the final results? Oh, or I'll read them to you. I'm sorry. Oh, there we go. Thank you. So it looks like most people are using analytics to drive business outcomes, followed by, as you can see, making learning interventions more effective, followed by proving value of learning interventions to stakeholders. Gentlemen, I don't know about you, but this surprises me. I would believe that that's the goal, but I guess it surprises me that that's actually the emphasis, in that I feel like we all want to get to driving business outcomes, but it's hard, and therefore we often end up focusing more on proving value, or equally important in my view to business outcomes is making learning interventions more effective. What's your how would you answer this question for based on your experience?
Doug,
This doesn't surprise me at all. I mean, I think ultimately we're in business. We're all in business to drive business outcomes, but it's almost like measuring your cholesterol levels to decrease your propensity to have a heart attack. You know, that's your intermediate indicator. So we do need to use analytics to make our learning interventions more effective and to prove the value of learning interventions to stakeholders, because that gets us the credibility and the money. So I think all three of these are potential uses of analytics. I just think the first two are enablers to the third.
Yeah. Alfredo, what do you think?
Yeah, no, I was going to say the same thing. You know, this is a tough one because all three of these are equally as important. But I do agree with what Doug said. The first two kind of enable the third one. But from my standpoint, where we are right now is that middle one. We have to, well, I'm with a group that's fairly new, so we're constantly proving the value and the effectiveness that we bring to the organization. But it's hard for me to say that one has a priority over the other.
Yeah. Doug, there's another area that people have questions on. Debbie, thanks so much. You can take off the poll now, and thank you for everyone for participating. There's another area that people have asked a number of questions about, some around just clarification, but then some around, if I were to summarize, what you do with this great information. So hopefully everyone can see the quotes that Doug was going over. And if I were to summarize some of these comments and questions, there's a lot of things to go chase here that could be pretty important. Like, you know, how do we tell whether if we're leading on issues of work-life balance, the difference between a good stress and bad stress? And is there real support? You mentioned this one. Is there real support for sort of a mutual gains approach, which for the uninitiated means finding win-wins in bargaining or negotiation situations, given that there might be a culture in at least one little unit of sort of hardliners, or perception that there might be a lack of sound decision making. There's so many things here that you could go try to solve. How do you decide what to go solve? How do you decide with whom to work with, and how do you decide, an issue to tackle for another day?
So, good question. This is where analytics and evaluation moves from being a science to being more of an art. So, I will tell you what I do not do is I don't take a comment or a couple of comments that are either critical or positive and draw conclusions from those one or two comments, because you're going to drive yourself nuts if you do a knee-jerk constant reaction to everything you read. So I look for trends. I look for consistent trends that say this is an issue or this is an opportunity. The next thing is to say which of those are issues or opportunities that have the potential to be addressed by some kind of a learning intervention or solution. And the reality of it is that it's not many. Most of these issues that come up are environmental, they're resource driven, they're leadership division driven, they're time management driven. So look at the few, and that really helps to cut out a lot of the issues that come up. Look at those that can be addressed by learning, and then use those as your directional indicators, and then share up the rest of the information. This is great data and information to share up the line to senior leaders about what's going on throughout the organization.
I think you made a good point before, just to echo that. You're really, if I understand what you're doing, you're really combining sort of a more systematic quantitative view, which kind of, to your point, gets you out of the trap of chasing every comment or concern that might be out there, so you can kind of see the general tendency, and then go to something like this to really get the color on it. And then to your point, where the science ends and the art begins, use judgment on where to go, which makes a lot of sense to me.
Agreed.
I also think we began the call saying we were going to look ahead to what's next. I do think that we have a potential as a profession, as we use these new analytical tools, to gather information that is otherwise not being uncovered by analyzing what people are thinking and saying about issues around leadership development, and then using that as a window to go solve the bigger issues, which involves partnerships and going beyond the learning function, et cetera. But I do think, at least, and we see this in your organization, Doug, and others, that's really where a frontier could be, which is using the learning function as a window into deeper human capital problems and opportunities in the company, and working with stakeholders to tackle those, all starting from a foundation of data that we collect in learning interventions.
Yeah, and that ties, I agree, Carl, that ties in directly with this idea of demonstrating impact with, even if you're not being asked to show the impact of those learning solutions. And one of those impacts is this intelligence gathering that you can do because of the fact that you're using these analytical instruments, both quantitative and qualitative, and letting the senior leaders know not just impacts, but here's some other trends or themes or messages that are coming out. And I think you're going to find, at least we have when we've been successful at doing this, that senior leaders go, we want more, we want to hear more, we want to learn more. And that's almost always a good thing.
That's right, almost. I agree completely. All right, great. So, Doug, thank you so much, and thank you for everyone who are sending in questions and comments. Please keep it going. Let's transition, if we would, to Alfredo, who's already been chiming in very insightfully. But Lana, let's give him the primary microphone and learn some lessons and insights from J&J. So, Alfredo, if you're ready to go, take it away.
Yeah, I am. Thank you, Carl and Doug. Thank you for the start of the presentation. You know, Doug, one of the things that you mentioned is that this is a very difficult process, and it really is. I'm from the school and belief, and from my experience, that look, the more simple we can keep this, it's the best way to get the information, or at least to share it. So I'm going to share with you all what we actually, some data points that we used for a specific program that we were doing with CorpU. You'll see that it's not complicated. I don't believe in over-engineering programs, but I think you will find it hopefully some very helpful. So, Carl, could you go to the next slide, please? So we, as I mentioned, we actually worked with CorpU to put together a program. We started a new initiative recently within J&J, and this is a monster. This is really, it's about a new way of working. This isn't about a process understanding. This isn't a linear approach. Those are easy. In my opinion, this Johnson & Johnson operating system is it says here, it's a new way of working at J&J, but in my opinion, it's really an exercise in strategic thinking and making thoughtful decisions and purposeful decisions. And that's a different way for many people to think, especially in supply chain. And I don't mean that as a ding, but in supply chain, you know, we have the mentality that it's all process and things of that nature. So this is a new concept for us. And so we had a great partnership with CorpU. You can see on the left side, the column there, how we started this. So in 2016, we did create a pilot with CorpU. In 2017, we actually launched this, and we started with 300 senior leaders. And then we're actually in the process of taking some of the information that we learned and making this a more robust program based on the key insights that we gathered. So as we start to roll this out to other folks, we can have even stronger impact. So on the right side, it shows you what the program looked like. It's what I call the roadmap. So it was a 7-day sprint. This was a globally launched enterprise-wide program. So we went across all of our segments, pharma, consumer, medical device, and on a global, across the world as well. With CorpU, there's some self-directed learning, some self-study, 30 minutes a day, 30 to 45 minutes. And then we had the 3 live events. So Carl, could you go to the next slide, please? And so the way we measured, one of the things that we wanted to do was we really were intent on measuring things almost in real time, I would say. And so we integrated 3 different approaches, as you can see here. A self kind of reporting, self-reflection. And then I think the important thing there is you have to challenge people to think. You have to start to get them to think critically and not just answer questions. But there's some other things that we did so that we can challenge them to really think about what they learned. I'm a big believer, and that's why I like the CorpU platform, that this peer-to-peer social collaborative way of learning, we do it without even a formal process. I mean, all of us reach out to colleagues and peers that we know have more experience and learn from them. And that's what this platform does. It allows people to connect virtually and just with many people to learn. And then the last one is the real time. So we have live polls and things like that, which allow us to get real-time information. All 3 of these really allow us to course correct as we're going down through the process. And for us, it was really critical because the concept is complicated, but we also wanted to make sure that we made the most of these 6 days for everyone else. So we'll start with the first one. So Carl, can we go to the next slide? So, you know, self-assessments, as you can see here, what we did on day 2 was we wanted to gauge where is everyone from their understanding. There was a lot of information, a lot of noise about this JJOS process, or I'm sorry, JJOS way of working. And you can see here on day 2, first thing is we gave them a self-assessment. It was multiple choice, as you can see here. And then we also gave them an assessment after the 2nd day session. So you can see from the morning assessment, in very simple 4 questions, the awareness, self-awareness was all over the board. You can see strongly agree or disagree all the way to some agree. Not many strong agrees. But as we go to the end of that day, and Carl, could you click on that? you can see that we did see a transfer of knowledge, and that was very promising. That's helpful for us so that we know that we're on the right path, we're given the right information, the discussions that are taking place are the right ones, or the learning, the content as well. So the self-assessment really allows us to kind of see these things in real time. I think it allows the learner to really reflect on what it is that they're learning and how confident they're getting with the information. Next slide, please, Carl. So this was a final assessment. So you can see that at the end of day 5, this was when we did our last assessment. It was extremely promising to us to see that the knowledge transfer was really moving in the right direction. If you remember, on day 2, it was all over the board, but on day 5, we started to see some movement in the understanding. So that's always a good signal for us, and that's why we use these type of self-assessment pieces. Next one, Carl. So the next one is this peer-to-peer, and as I mentioned, I love this piece because I do think that this is how we learn informally or even formally. Next slide, Carl, please. So with the social collaborative way, or the peer-to-peer learning, oops, give me a second. So one thing that I found very interesting with the platform, and for those of you that may not be familiar with the CorpU methodology, is it's really a great process that they integrate into the platform. And so if you can, as you see on the first bubble there, the discussion activities. So what they're doing is they're able to capture discussions, chats that are taking place throughout the week. And that's critical because, first of all, we know that people learn from, as I mentioned, from talking and sharing with each other. But the thing that I've never been able to use in the past was, how do we capture that? How do we capture those key phrases or key words in a sense? And so you can see in the second bubble that they have a process called CorpU National Language Process Algorithms. And so the beauty of this is it really does capture the language that they're using within the platform. And so that capturing that language really kind of helps us understand, are the learning concepts really becoming something that's going to be nomenclature or very natural for them? And so if they're learning it and using it, then that's also a great signal. And at the end of the day, what we hope that with this social learning, with capturing the themes, showing that they are starting to process and understand the information, it's going to lead to really how they feel. And for us, and I think Carl said this in the beginning, what this shows us is, do they understand it? Do they believe it? And from my perspective, what this does is shows confidence in the content and what they're learning. So capturing these themes is really, really great and helpful for us. Next one, Carl. And so this just kind of shows why we use the dialogue or the information. On the left is the survey data, the self-survey pieces, and then you can see on the right, this is about capturing those key themes. And actually, Carl, can you go to the next one, please? And so these are some examples of some of the key themes, and you can see the content, the chats that are taking place are pretty thorough. They're not just key one or two words or messages. So this is really good for us to really see. In this case, what we did was we took these understandings, and Doug said this earlier, it's not about one or two comments, it's about trends. And so if we can start to see very complex themes like this, it actually helps us to really course correct if we need to, or at a very minimum, it gives us more confidence that we're moving in the right direction with the materials that we're using and the learnings that are taking place. Next one, Carl, please. And so the last one is, this is one I really enjoy, is this kind of the live polling. If you can go to the next one, Carl. So you can see that these are pretty simple, right? But the questions are good for us to really understand. And I think what it does is, look, this just feeds us real-time information. If we see that it's still, the message is not clear, then what we did was we really took all of these pieces of information. We did have live sessions or office hours, things like that. So we use this data to really course correct if we needed to when we had the opportunity. The program itself was done virtually, and I'm sorry, I should have mentioned that. It was done virtually, but we did have 3 key live events or some type of touch point. So instead of just having a live session with just kind of like, we're not sure what we're going to talk about, we had a lot of information that we could direct and drive those conversations based on the key themes that were captured, so that we could address and make some maybe some issues or some concepts that weren't as clear. That it gave us an opportunity to really have a chance to spend more time and make those type of things clear. So again, and I'm sorry. So yeah, we also with the polling questions, instead of just making it a multiple choice or one of these strongly disagrees to strongly agree, we actually asked them to give us some insights too. We challenged them again to think a little bit critically. So along with the live polling of the multiple choice, we also gave them questions, open-ended questions. And so this allows us even to have another opportunity to course correct in real time. So like I said when I started, we try to keep things very simple, but it's not about making it complex. It's about getting the right information so that you can take the right actions so that people understand and can actually walk away and hopefully start changing their behaviors. So that's all I have.
Alfredo, thank you so much. Just a couple of questions.
Sure.
That we're getting. A number of people have commented on just liking the simplicity of it. Even this frame, someone described it as the oval stack. Self-assessment, discussion themes, live polls is just a way to organize the metrics that you are collecting. The thing that jumps out to me is, at least in my experience, Doug, I would love your take. You're really investing a lot in using metrics to make real-time adjustments to a learning intervention during learning intervention itself. So if I'm tracking with you, Alfredo, you're adjusting during the week. So again, for people who aren't familiar with how CorpU works, we often run online learning communities with their dialogue rich. We call them sprints, and they're usually about a week long. And so you're using this data to adjust real time during the sprint, and then before the live event at the end of the sprint, and even during the live event itself, as people, to use your phrase, raise their hand to ask questions about what they understand or don't. Am I understanding all the different pivots that you are making as learning intervention goes on?
Yeah, no, that is correct. And I'll tell you, this was probably a little different of a process because number one, the problem, the JJOS is complex. And so we knew that we had to have as much intervention as we could right away. We couldn't just do an e-learning type of thing and hope that people got it. And so you're right. That's why we kept this very simple, because it allowed us to have that information in real time so that we can make the adjustments needed. It's probably not a perfect process, but if we have that opportunity to take information in real time and take action when we have these live sessions, it's really valuable. I think the live sessions are even more robust and rich because we see what's taking place. We know where the challenges are. We know what's really has landed well or people are understanding. So yeah, it was a different process for us, but you're right. It was all about having the information in real time so that we can make course corrections fast.
Yep. Which form of data is most useful? And maybe there's not a single answer, but which form of data is most useful for making adjustments? So, for example, do you find yourself paying more attention to the dialogue data in preparation for the live event at the end of the sprint, or do you find yourself paying more attention to the self-assessment, for example, on day 1, day 2, day 3, to sort of see if they're tracking? Is there any pattern in which one appears to be more powerful for driving your adjustments real time?
Well, I mean, look, it depends. I think, again, like one of the other questions we had, they're all equally important because, look, the self-assessments helps us understand how people are really feeling. I would say that the methodology that we get using your platform with the capturing the themes, that's really helpful for us. That's the opportunity for us because we can see direct questions, quotes, comments, and it allows us to really understand what the next steps should be that we take. It's just more information than just looking at a question and seeing I strongly agree or don't disagree. So in my opinion, they're all as important, Carl, but I think the methodology of capturing those key themes is really beneficial.
A question from Chris in the audience, just a factual one. Are you doing, she's asking about the polling. I believe she's saying, are you doing polling or sort of check-ins after the intervention is over? He or she is saying, are you doing any 3-month or 6-month out polls? I assume out means from the intervention. Do you stick with this community over time?
No, not yet. I mean, look, this is we're in the process of really fully deploying this in 2019, and I think we definitely have to do something, capture some kind of put a process in place to capture metrics to see if the understanding is still there. We are working on some different programs where we have some tools that we use for retention purposes to kind of measure that. But this will definitely be something that we will have to consider and think about as we move forward.
It's something we're really interested in as well, in part because we, maybe like you and folks like Chris, it's something that we feel like is underdone within learning functions. You know, everyone knows the stats. You know, the learning intervention happens, and the retention and the implementation quickly degrade after that. So we're trying to do some interesting development with a number of our clients that would enable us to sort of coach them along to implement the learning as they go at regular intervals, exactly like Chris is asking about. You know, so 30 days later, hey, you know, Alfredo, you said you were going to do this in the JJOS approach. How's that going? You know, both as a way to know whether it's happening and encourage it if it is. So, Chris, as you go forward, maybe, and Alfredo, obviously, as you do as well, would love to work with you on that.
Yeah, no, and I do think, Carl, that's a really critical piece of any good educational program. Just to be clear, this was more of the first touch point. This was an awareness type of program. There'll be some further deployments where they get more into the tactical pieces, but this was really the first step of helping everyone with the understanding, because the concepts are pretty difficult. But definitely, as we move forward, we always want to gather that additional information to make sure that the understanding and learnings are really sticking.
Doug, what do you think from the Murk perspective?
Yeah, so one of the mad props I'd love to give to Alfredo and his team around this ongoing, modifications and improvements they make as the sprints go along. It can be difficult to do because of how, agile you need to be. But what I've seen when we have engaged in this behavior are two benefits, one being behind the curtain and one being in front of the curtain. And I think both are equally important. So behind the curtain, you're modifying, Janine Barron and I did this with a 4-month curriculum that we had created. We immediately saw that there was too much content in certain areas. And so behind the scenes, we deleted and we modified so that users never see those changes. And that's fine, because what it does is it creates a more positive experience for the learners, unbeknownst to them. But just as important is when you, from the beginning of the sprint to the end, make modifications that are obvious to the participants. I think that sends a message that says, hey, the kinds of behaviors and thinking that we're asking you to engage in, that's what we're doing as well. We're not sitting on our laurels and creating something and hoping for the best. We're engaging in continuous improvement and challenging ourselves and developing constantly. And I honestly believe that people respond to their surroundings. And I think that has the potential to make people more engaged and better learners and participants. So I give a lot of kudos to Alfredo and his team.
Yeah, thank you, Doug. I think what it shows too is that, and what the way this was put together with the platform with CorpU's help is we had that opportunity, that luxury, because we did have some live events where, and so this was a way to prepare for those. But you know what, I think what this really shows in any type of program that you put together, that if you listen, it just shows that you're listening. Many times we take surveys and do things and we don't do anything with it. But for the participants, if they see that they're really being listened to and things are being addressed, then I just think it makes someone even more engaged.
Agreed with that fully, especially as we look beyond not only making the learning interventions better, either real time or over time through multiple iterations, but then go to working on the organization. It really builds credibility and engagement. At least we are told by folks like you and other clients. So I completely echo Alfredo's point. We have a bunch more questions in the platform, but I'm afraid we should probably start to bring things to a close. First off, let me just quickly do a round of thanks to my CorpU colleague, Debbie, who's been making things run smoothly in the background, to all the people who have been chiming in with questions and comments. Really, really appreciate your engagement in the webinar. It's made it much more valuable, I know, for everyone else in the audience and the three of us on the panel as well. And perhaps above all else, let me thank Doug from Merck and Alfredo from J&J. Gentlemen, not only do we all appreciate the time, but it's really interesting, impressive work, and it's gotten me to think about some things in a new way. So thank you so much. If I were to,
Thank you, Carl.
if I were to sort of,
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, guys. I really appreciate it. If I were to sort of wrap us up, we started by saying we were going for some big questions, and I think a lot of the conversation revealed that our aspirations are great and the bar is high to not only move learning outcomes, but really, as I think about them, talent or human capital outcomes in our companies. But I also feel like Doug and Alfredo's work reveals that we have big aspirations, but we're getting there piece by piece, whether it's by leveraging measurement or analytics or dialogue or the combination of all of them. We're making steps toward those big aspirations. And the other thing that jumps out at me is simple steps toward the great aspiration go a long way. And, it's not about going from 0 to 100, going from 0 to 10 to 40 to 60, can really start to unpeel and realize the analytical promise that I think we all see in our learning intervention. So from my perspective, this has just been wonderful. And gentlemen, thank you so much. And thank you, audience. And Debbie, I'll turn it over to you to close this out.
All right, well, we will go ahead and send out the recording and the slides, and as long as nobody has any questions, we can wrap it up.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.
All right, take care. Bye.